When we take a look at where the AMD platform has been at, right? We've had AM3, we had previous generation CPUs with the AMD FX series of CPUs, along with the older chipset, the 990FX. And so, while a very capable chipset, capable platform, you know, it definitely was starting to be a little bit long in the tooth in terms of what it could offer in terms of core specifications. Now, we definitely worked to help to update a couple of these things through refreshes, but you didn't natively have, you know, USB 3.0 or USB 3.1. You didn't have M.2 with NVMe support. There wasn't PCIe Gen 3 support. So there was a lot of things that I think some enthusiasts felt were lacking in terms of building a new modern system. And then on top of that, right, there's a lot of things that we've done from year to year to keep improving on the core features and functions of motherboards, whether we're talking about overclocking technologies, fan controls, new types of design implementations, aesthetics, lighting, all kinds of cool stuff. So
yeah, sorry if I was just looking at the computer. I just wanted to get the streams all up so I can see your guys' comments and your questions. So feel free to ask questions during the stream and I'll try to get to them. But we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you've got some burning questions, you can save them for the end, and we'll go ahead and answer them the best we can. So
yeah, and hopefully through the course of this, we're going to cover hopefully a lot of what you guys are wondering about in terms of what we're bringing to the table with these boards.
Definitely.
But as we kind of shift now into 2017, it's really exciting because we're able to bring now the AMD boards into a current generation standing in terms of what we're doing from board design aspects, and that pairs up perfectly with, of course, the latest generation series CPUs, and even the latest generation of graphics cards, and you know, FreeSync monitors and all kinds of stuff. So I think now when we take a look at X370, the things that I think most enthusiasts are interested in is, hey, we've got current specification support, right? So we got native USB 3.0, we've got USB 3.1, we've got M.2 with NVMe support, we have PCIe Gen 3, which is great for, of course, all the latest generation graphics cards, right? And we've got DDR4, right? DDR4 is, I think, another big one because that means you've got high density support, so you can do, you know,
up to 64 gigs.
64 gigs.
With 16 gigabyte DIMMs.
Exactly. So that's going to really help to make sure that you got a lot of room in terms of memory for being able to handle all types of different types of workloads. And then, of course, the higher frequencies that come with DDR4. So you then pair that over with what you're doing on this latest generation Ryzen series processor in terms of the performance that it can offer, where you're going to get a great gaming experience, you're going to get great advanced productivity and an amazing content creation experience. Because regardless of whether you're talking about the 1700 or either one of the X variants,
yeah, they're all 8 core, right?
8 core, 16 threads, right? 20 megs of cache. These are absolutely monster CPUs. And so I think it's really exciting for AMD and PC DIY enthusiasts in general to be able to have this now new option at being able to build a high performance gaming system, and for some pretty amazing pricing too, you know, which is the pretty cool part, you know, this level of performance at this price.
Yeah, definitely a fantastic value if you're going to be building a high-end gaming system or workstation, whatever. Yeah. So why don't we start by introducing the first board we're going to talk about here. This is the Prime X370 Pro. So why don't we just start, like, what's
Prime all about, right?
Yeah. What's the new Prime? I know we've seen this in some of our other recently released boards. What is Prime and who's it really for?
So, you know, ASUS has now been making motherboards for, you know, over 2 decades, right? So a really long period of time. And perennially, we've had actually a lot of boards that are very popular, like our Pro series, our Deluxe series, boards like that. And for our previous generation AMD boards, they were very popular with the M5A series. But what we've decided to now do is brand our kind of mainstream series, so kind of the classic ASUS boards, which really were known for reliability, stability, quality, innovation, and performance under this new Prime moniker. This really helps to kind of set a foundation that it is a outstanding experience for regardless of whatever your usage is. When you go about building a system, whether it's for gaming, content creation, you know, prosumer, you know, advanced productivity, it doesn't matter. This is going to give you a great foundation, have a great experience across any one of those usage models.
Right, so it'll make a great system. I mean, and it's not an entry-level board. It is
the
X370 chipset, but it's just kind of our all-around board. So if you're, you know, going to build a productivity workstation or something, would be a great system. Or even, since it does have integrated, we'll get into the detailed specs later, but it does have integrated DisplayPort and HDMI, so if you used an AMD APU, you could build a really low power workstation with it.
Yeah, or also if, you know, maybe you're going from the other slant, maybe you're building a system where you want to be able to target kind of more generalized titles like MOBAs, you know, so, you know, Team Fortress 2 or League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Go, things along those lines, which don't necessarily require super high-end GPU configurations. That's where that APU, along with like the DDR4, you get more than enough performance to be able to have nice gameplay experience, but still snappy general usage, right? But the cool thing is you can evolve literally from that APU or even the R3 or the i5 series CPUs all the way now to R7, right? With 1800X, that's pretty crazy on one single board, right?
Nice. So let's go ahead and look at the kind of the aesthetics of this board.
And that's one of the unique attributes,
Right.
and I'm a big fan of it. We pushed to a pretty high degree with our R&D team and our creative design team to be able to kind of set a new design trend, and we've now had this for a couple of generations where we've pushed this white design aesthetic.
Yeah.
I think it's really fresh and modern, and it's kind of a really nice contrast to the kind of the more gamer-centric color schemes that we see that we've had defined like on our ROG series of motherboards,
Right.
or our Strix series. So it fits well in terms of kind of fitting a lot of different users. You can see that you've got that beautiful black PCB, the monochromatic color scheme, and then that white accenting. And the great thing there is that there's no color that's kind of contending with another color. So you could still contrast this with, take for instance, like here, you know, if you do something like, you know, blue and black, right?
Right.
It perfectly fits with this.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to
So
fight
it's kind
against
of like,
it.
I mean, with the monochromatic design with the white and black, you can pretty much create whatever you want. You know, or even I've seen some pretty incredible, like with some of our older white and black boards, some incredible like white and black systems.
Yep,
You know,
yeah,
where it's like,
just in general, yeah.
like using those cables you've got there, that's a pretty nice looking.
Exactly, so that's a really nice combination when you kind of pair that design aesthetic up, and you can see that we've thought about this the all the way around, because if we take a look like our dual series cards here, so this is a dual RX 480, you can see that it's got this white shroud. It perfectly complements the look of this board, so it pairs this overall feeling of kind of, you know, a clean, crisp design aesthetic really well, but at the same time, even if we take something like our Strix cards, which are all black, it still looks good with this color combination. And this is where I think one of the other interesting elements is when we talk about the general design aesthetic. So ASUS has really been leading the industry in terms of RGB lighting. You know, we were the first vendor to actually implement it directly on a board in terms of our Maximus series, where we had RGB lighting for the PCH, and we've evolved that further. For this board, we actually have RGB lighting here in the sound section.
Right, so it actually shows through like it's a little line. We actually don't have a picture of it, but
yeah, if we flip the little board around, you can see that here's the actual audio isolation layer, but there's actually little LEDs behind there, and once those LEDs turn on, you actually get this nice diffusion color scheme that kind of pops out through the front. So it's not super abrupt and kind of doesn't just jump out at you.
It's a pretty subtle RGB lighting effect. So for those of you who aren't huge fans of the RGB,
and you can turn it on, of course, if you turn it off if you don't want it.
you can always turn RGB off if you don't like it, but it does look really nice.
And of course, for those enthusiasts though that do want to be able to extend the aesthetics to the next level, we of course have our ASUS Aura Sync initiative. So we have an Aura header on here. So this is great because users can go ahead and connect things like compatible RGB LED strips, chassis which have integrated RGB LED lighting. There's also, of course, now new RGB DIMMs that we've worked with partners like G-Skill, take for instance, where they can even be synchronized with that, and you can even extend that out to other devices or even our graphics cards, like our Strix cards, or even peripherals, like you're rocking over there.
So we got the Claymore here. And also, this is probably one of the first times we've seen this in public. This is the Gladius 2, which is RGB. It's just kind of going on a red glow right now, but it's.
But you can fully synchronize it.
Yeah, so you can synchronize it with all the colors on the graphics card. It's all one, you know, all in one house.
Yeah, and the cool part is that that's actually only available with ASUS products. So that kind of, I think, drives the narrative in terms of the aesthetics. But let's keep moving things forward. So I think one of the next interesting points is a lot of people, of course, wonder about kind of your core, specifications in terms of what you usually have for the VRM design, right? And this usually translates into the overclocking experience, right? So one of the amazing things, and I think the things that I was super excited about as an enthusiast that AMD did, was enable an unlocked CPU architecture. That means essentially that you've got your baseline clock frequencies, but they're giving you the ability that you can go in and you can manually extend that to higher performance levels, right? And the great thing about that is it's on all Ryzen series CPUs.
So all the new ones are unlocked. You can overclock them and try to get a little bit more performance out of them.
Exactly, and actually, you know, depending on your overclock, it could actually be quite a bit of a healthy performance gain, right? When we talk about something like a 1700 or an 1800X, you know, and you take it from, let's say, that 3.6 gigahertz base, and we overclock it to 4.1, right? 16 threads at 4.1. That's a pretty monster system, right? So a lot of people then have questions as like, well, how does the VRM influence this? Well, the VRM, for those not in the know, that's the voltage regulation modules. Those are essentially your key components, such as your capacitors, your chokes, your MOSFETs, and your drivers. Those all provide the power delivery. So ASUS has really been an industry leader. We were the first to unilaterally implement digital power delivery designs on motherboards, and it is really the benchmark of being able to offer a wide flexibility to how you tune your hardware. So what this really means in the real world is having digital power delivery is you can jump into what are called the UEFI, some people still call it the BIOS, but you have really nice options at being able to tune either towards efficiency and stability or maximizing your overclocking margin. So you can go in and tailor all those things, and of course all the core components there help to ensure a reliable experience. Even if you want to be able to take your Ryzen chip and overclock to 4 gigahertz under full load, this board is not going to hold you back. So even even though while this is not going to have the same class of VRM that we have on our Crosshair or ROG series motherboard, you're still going to get a great OC experience. Whereas some people wonder, then where's quote unquote the compromise, right?
Yeah.
It's in basic things. So an example is like the heatsink. Here we've got good heat sinks, but like on the Crosshair, when we jump into that, that's got a really beefy heatsink with a heat pipe.
Yeah. So like with the Prime, you can overclock, and it will do a good job at it. But if you're going to want to be breaking records and do maybe some LN2 cooling, you're going to want to go with like the ROG board. Right?
Definitely. Or if you're somebody that also just cares critically about cooling performance, a perfect example is like what we have here with the Dual and with the Strix. They're both cooler and quieter than reference cards, right? But the Strix has a big heat sink that dissipates more heat, right? So the temperature for the VRM take, for instance, would be a bit cooler because it not only has a better heat pipe and heat sink, but the power components also operate more efficiently. But all the way around, regardless, you're going to get a great OC experience. Now, one thing before we move over to the core specifications, and we keep on overclocking because I think it's one of the most exciting parts about this platform, is that we've spent a lot of time and effort to make overclocking really simple and easy for you. So we've got really two ways to do it. You can do it the old school manual way.
Yeah, where you go in and individually set all the voltages and the timings and all that, which I was never good at. So.
Yeah, well, and it can be complicated, especially if you're a builder that, the last time you built a system was 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? There's a lot of changes that happen. Sometimes you might not be familiar with the difference between like a manual voltage or an offset voltage. You might not be familiar with what are the target multiplier ranges to sit at. What should I do with load light calibration, right? You start to offer in a couple of things, and it can be a little bit daunting, it can be a little bit complicated. Now, we do have what are called auto rolls, so that means that if you go into our UEFI, if you set about 3 to 4 parameters, the board will pretty much auto-negotiate these things, and generally...
So you could say, like, what kind of parameters are we talking? Like a certain voltage?
Generally the multiplier and like your DRAM speed. If you set the multiplier, so let's say we jumped in and we set our multiplier for 40, right? That would mean 4 gigahertz. And we'll automatically actually set the voltage for you, so you don't need to worry about it. But the disadvantage is that it might be targeted at a slightly higher level because we need to have that automatic voltage to try to account for the largest variance of the CPUs that are out there, right? So this is actually what you find with a lot of motherboard vendors that have like presets. They might have like a button or a knob on the board that lets you set it to a certain frequency. But the challenge of that is that there's a silicon lottery. A lot of CPUs, there's no guarantee to know what the CPU can reach or what's the voltage that's needed to do that. So what did we do? We invented actually a technology called auto-tuning that's part of our 5-way optimization suite. So the cool thing about this is you go into the desktop, you use a software application, but it's only software in terms of the front end. This is still tuning the board on a hardware level.
Right. So you just have a user interface within Windows that you can adjust everything with.
Exactly. So you can adjust it, and you got really cool target values. So you can define a target value like the temperature. So you could set something like 80 degrees. So my maximum overclock would be whatever it is until it reaches the 80 degree point.
So it'll just go as fast as possible until it reaches that temperature threshold, and then
it stops at whatever that frequency is. The other option would be a target voltage. So you could apply a certain amount of voltage as far as being your maximum, and it will tune up to that voltage limit.
Right. Now, how new are these features? Like, how long have we had those on these boards?
These are actually, this specific type of features are very new. We really only introduced them in about the last, 16 months. So it's a very new type of technology that we've implemented. So if the last time you use any type of auto overclocking was 3, 4, 5 years ago, this is entirely game changing in terms of how easy it is. The last option is actually, I think, the easiest one, which is set a target frequency.
Right.
So, a lot of people, they talk about in the forums, or they talk to their friends, or they kind of say, what can I get out of this, right? And so people say, 4 or 4.1. Well, you just set the frequency, and we'll attempt to automatically tune up to that frequency. From there, you can set things like the actual stress test duration. So by default, it's 15 seconds, but you can set up to an hour increments between each test.
So every time it'll wait an hour between testing a new threshold.
Exactly. And so if you think about that, that's pretty crazy because what I tell people is, hey, set it right before you go to sleep, and then when you wake up in the morning, you could have gone through 6 or 7, 8 hours, but it'll be maxed out, and you get a really reliable, stable OC. You can have it simultaneously stress test the memory, and you can even actually set something that's called AVX instruction sets. So you're actually do a lot of our editing, right, for our videos. When you're using professional programs like Adobe Premiere or content creation programs, they can use something that's called AVX. Gamers don't need to worry about this, but this is really demanding. It can produce more heat, and it can be quite a bit more taxing. So we have actually a special option that even for overclocking, you can set it to stress test with AVX instruction sets. So that even for the most demanding scenarios, we help to kind of validate the stability of the overclock based on those conditions. So that's a really cool level of overclocking that's all built in the board.
Other cool features that I think is a good segue into is the DDR4 memory.
Yep.
Because most of the memory that is out today is all, it's kind of built for Intel. It's got XMP profiles built in.
Yes.
So how do these new boards kind of work with that?
So that's actually a really challenging thing, but at ASUS, we're committed to try to figure out cool ways to make things easier. Yeah. So we actually had to implement something in our UEFI that's called DOCP profiling. So the DOCP profiles essentially help to read the Intel XMP data that's on this memory, so your frequency, your timings, and your voltages, and automatically apply them to the board. Now, the architectures are different from, an Intel CPU and chipset to what's offered on the AMD platform, but we're able to generally translate this and then help to extend and enable a smoother experience for overclocking when it comes to DDR4. So what does that translate into the real world? It means that this board, even on the entry side, can handle up to 2 DIMMs up to 3200 megahertz, while offering a solid level of stability.
So with 2 DIMMs DDR4, that's up to 32 gigs.
Yeah,
and that's more than most people would need.
Exactly, and in the sweet spot, realistically, in memory, you're generally right now looking between about 2133 to about 2800 in terms of kind of that price to performance. Tends to really only be kind of the biggest enthusiasts want to jump into that kind of 3000 or 3200 more. So I think it's a good bank, and we also have incorporated a special what we call T-topology exclusive memory design, which helps to also maximize 4 DIMM clocking configurations. So that's going to be a little bit lower than what you're going to have in terms of the 3200.
So
but you can still have.
So if you're using 4, then you're limited to a lower.
Yeah, lower frequency. So right now that would be around 2400 megahertz generally for 4 DIMM operation, but still quite solid in those higher density configurations. And we'll continue to evolve and improve upon that with more firmware tuning over time.
Okay.
So that kind of helps to handle a lot of the keys.
We kind of went pretty deep there into like the overclocking and the UEFI BIOS and all that. But let's talk about just kind of like the nuts and bolts of the board. Why don't we go over some of the the connectivity and some of the features built into this board?
So when we go from the key I/O spec, one of the first ones right here on the right-hand side of the board is we got a front USB 3.1 header. So this is pretty interesting. This is actually a special, brand new implementation that we're putting on our board. So there's no chassis on the market yet that actually have this type of standard. We're working with partners, and they'll be coming in the not too distant future. But it's great to know that with a brand new chipset like this, you've kind of got a little bit of future-proofing built in, so that if you change that out, you've got that fastest USB 3.0. Now, of course, at the bottom of the board, you're going to have a traditional USB 3.0 connection. So, standard chassis that have that, you're good to go. Now, when we move over into the back I/O is quite rich. I think for a standard system like this, you're going to have USB 3.0. Then you got your PS2 combo connector for the guys that are still rocking those old keyboards and mice. You've got the HDMI and DP, which I know you're a fan of. If you want to be able to drop in an APU series processor in here. We can then drop down below that, and you've got USB Type-C and USB 3.0. That's a nice update as well to be able to have.
Definitely. And a lot of the new peripherals are going to be USB Type-C.
Yeah, and even many other devices, our latest generation tablets and smartphones, they're all USB Type-C.
Yeah, the new Zenphones that we come out with.
Exactly. So we drop down below that, and you've got USB 3.1. I'm a huge fan of that, especially now we're getting.
If you're looking at the picture here, those are the teal ones here. That's the USB 3.1.
And that's a killer spec to have, natively built in the chipset, fast level of performance, especially now that we're getting a lot of these really high-speed flash drives and solid-state external hard drives. Really nice to be able to have. We drop one more below that, and we got 2 more USB 3 ports. So the number of ports here is also, I think, really nice because especially with things like VR and the number of peripherals you have, you want to be able to have a lot of ports, right?
So actually, before we move on, I'll remember where we're at, but I just wanted to ask you, because some people might notice there's a PS2 plug on there, and so some people might think, hey, that's an older plug. Why would I use that older interface? Can you explain why we would still include that on a motherboard?
So that traditionally comes from a lot of feedback from the enthusiast community. Oddly enough, what we find is that the X370 chipset, while it's a high-end chipset, it usually actually is targeted at users that have spent a bit more money. So they might have a nicer, older mechanical series keyboard that has that as benefit. There's also a technical overclocking benefit. This actually is, since it's an analog interface, it doesn't have certain buffers or certain timeout periods that occur.
USB has.
Exactly. Now, most of the newer ones are like this. Claymore has what's called N-key rollover, so it doesn't have this type of buffer issue, but historically that has been a benefit of PS2.
But if you're using one of those older IBM keyboards that's mechanical, you can plug that in and still use it.
Yeah, so it's just trying to provide a good compromise for people that still want that.
Okay, so now let's continue on. I think we were talking about the networking, the NIC card there.
So here we move in, of course, you've got gigabit Ethernet built on board. Now this is an Intel NIC. It's kind of really considered the reference standard in the industry. We have our packet priority software in there, but one of the unique things that you can't easily see is that we've redesigned this entire actually Ethernet port, quote unquote. So this uses a new production process, and we call it LAN guard. And so historically, the new type of design now incorporates what's called SMT production, or surface mount technology. It's actually the same way that we produce our high-end graphics cards. It's all robotically done.
Okay.
So this actually gives us more surface area to be able to put special diodes that protects against surges and spikes. This is important because a lot of people don't realize that actually you can get damage to your Ethernet port and even damage your whole board, because you can get things like surges, spikes, brownout, or ESD that can come through that. So we've helped to improve the overall quality and reliability of that port through that technology. And you also see directly behind that, there's actually the little LAN guard chip that works in conjunction with that.
Okay.
And last but not least is, of course, in terms of the networking, we have our TurboLAN software, which is packet priority software. So you can, tune and prioritize your games or your streaming applications, or you're downloading whatever it might be, or if you're checking out the latest YouTube stream or Twitch stream, right? And then here at the bottom is where things get interesting, because this is a combination of not only the physical connection, but the audio design on the board. So we've got multi-channel line level output. And then we have a Toslink optical output. I know you were a fan of the Toslink optical out.
Right.
That's really cool.
Okay, that's cool. Like if you wanted to build a like a home theater system, then you have an optical connection you can run out to your
receiver, yeah.
Your receiver, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get that pure digital output so that you can get great audio experience.
And with this board, because you can run it with an APU, you can build it in a super slim chassis if you're not using a graphics card, which would be kind of cool.
Yep, yeah, you can go low profile with it. Now, if you move over into the audio section, right, once we pass in terms of the core specs, like, of course, we passed over, but we do also have it here on the board, the M.2, which is PCIe Gen 3 with by 4 support. You got dual by 16 slots, so of course you can support single GPU or multi-GPU configurations, and you got your by 1 for traditional expansion. But where I get really excited is down here, which is going to be in the audio section. Right. So in terms of the audio design, we reinvented on ROG series the isolated.
So I got through an image up here, and we can see this line going down through that kind of separates the audio processing from the rest of the board. And then what is that called, and kind of why do we do that?
Yeah, so this isolation path that we implemented was helped to essentially reduce the amount of interference and noise that the audio section of the board has. So for a lot of you guys that have older series motherboards, or maybe didn't invest in a higher end ROG board that had this, the benefit is that you don't get a lot of these kind of hisses and pops and crackles and hums and noises that you would get on older builds where the audio would be influenced by this section. So for this generation, we're really doing a lot of really cool stuff here. One, we got a brand new audio codec, the Realtek 1220 audio codec. Right. This is brand new from Realtek, very high-end audio specification. It also has a special version that we've optimized internally for this board that gives us improved line level input, not just line level output.
So for like streamers, or if you're going to be...
Anybody using an analog mic, essentially.
Analog microphone or a headset with an analog connection.
Correct. You're going to get
really good for that, really good quality.
You're going to get a better experience. Rounding out that audio design, we've got, of course, the audio grade capacitors. We also have automatic input impedance detection. So that means that a lot of headphones that are out there, some people don't realize that there's different driving strengths. So it's like 32 ohms or 150 ohms. And sometimes if you don't actually set the correct output power, the actual phone can sound weak, or it sounds tinny, or it doesn't sound as full. So we can automatically do that for you on the front headphone as well as on the line level out. And you also...
So that'll give it more, like your games and everything, a more fuller sound.
Fuller, richer sound is ultimately, so music, movies, and games, you get that better experience. So, that operational amplifier, that audio grade capacitor, and that isolation, you're going to get a really nice audio experience.
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, so what are some of the, I think the next thing we wanted to talk about is the fan expert. The amount of fan headers we have on here, because it's quite a bit, and the ability to control those fans.
Yeah, so this is, I think, something that when a lot of people look at building a system, they kind of look at a board and they count the number of headers because they want to know how many fans they can connect to a system, right? But they don't necessarily think about what are the type of control experience that I have available to me on the motherboard. And this is something that we've put a huge amount of R&D effort to be able to provide absolutely the best fan controls in the industry. So when we take a look at the board, let's start from the kind of core connections that we would want. So from the top, right here, we've got your traditional combo connection. So that's a CPU and CPU optional.
Right, so right up here.
That's going to be perfect, of course, for connecting your standard kind of tower heatsink, either single fan or two fan setup, or closed loop water cooling solution like 240 millimeter setup. That's you got you covered. And
so
then
you would plug that in for the fans, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if you're using an all-in-one pump solution, there's also a header made specifically for the pump. Right?
You got it, Greg. So right over here on this part of the board, we actually have a dedicated all-in-one pump header. So that saves you, because a lot of people sometimes they were always wondering, like, where do I connect this pump header to? Do I have to kind of disable something? Do I have to set it to a certain speed? We take care of all that for you. You just directly make that connection and you're good to go. Now where things get more special is, of course, when you start to look at the other chassis fan headers. So we can see right next to that we have another header. Down here at the bottom we have these. So for the standard chassis fan headers, we've got a couple of different things. One, they're all 4-pin, but because they're 4-pin, they can actually also support 3-pin interface, but this actually also has to occur on a hardware design. And so what this means essentially is we have the ability to control 3 pins and 4-pin fans, so DC or PWM. We can run full calibration and profiling, so this means that we can figure out their minimum operating speed and their maximum operating speed.
So the software automatically will test them. It'll ramp them up and go them down and just kind of see what the operating speed is, so it gets a profile for the fan.
Exactly, and this is unique. So even if you have different fans, so maybe you have CPU fans that are different from your chassis fans, we uniquely find out those attributes for them. And you noted software, but actually we have all these exact same options in the UEFI. So even if you're like an old school guy and you don't want to use the software interface, you can still go into our UEFI and do the fan calibration and profiling.
Or the BIOS for the old school people.
Yeah, we also have what's called fan ramping, and you can control that. That's important because when you have fan ramping, if you have the fan ramp very quickly, you get the best cooling performance, but it produces the most noise.
The most noise.
You get this kind of like this whirling effect, right? Whereas if you kind of delay the actual ramping, you get a softer a response in terms of the cooling performance, but it's quieter.
Yeah, and it's still increasing the cooling efficiency as it goes up, just a little bit slower, so you don't get that all of a sudden the fans are going at full speed.
Yeah, you don't get that whir kind of sound that you would kind of expect from a system. Now, where things get really interesting for this generation, though, is you add in all that stuff, and that stuff was really cool, right? But two key things that I think get often overlooked is, one is going to be that with the PWM output control, we have the ability to go ahead and actually have PWM fan splitter cables. So a lot of new chassis, you've got 2 or 3 front-mounted fans, right?
So you can attach all of those to like one chassis fan connection.
Exactly. All you need is just buy a cheap fan splitter cable, plug it in there, power those fans from the power supply, but have them all controlled by the motherboard.
All 3 of those will be the same control, same speed, and everything.
Yeah, that works really great for front intake or top intake fan configurations, or exhaust, or radiator type configurations.
Yeah, I can definitely see you'd want to use that on a radiator, so they're all going the same.
Exactly. Now, in addition to that, there's also a water pump header. You can see right here we've got actually an integrated pump and reservoir solution, and these actually have a 4-pin interface. So the cool thing about that is you actually have the ability to directly connect this and power this, or you can run higher amperage fans.
Yeah, where is that pump connection on here?
On this one, it should actually be, I believe, in the lower section, down here on the board. Yeah, it should be this one right here. In the bottom corner. So you've got a lot of flexibility in that regard in terms of being able to introduce pump-based configurations. Now, one of the last things that I think is most unique in terms of the fan controls is going to be temperature input mapping.
Right.
So this is something that a lot of people kind of really don't understand when you initially talk to them about it.
It's basically like having the fans being automatically controlled by the temperature of a component.
Exactly, exactly. So traditionally and historically, for literally almost, for literally years, you've had everything generally be dictated by the CPU.
Yeah.
The main challenge, the disadvantage of that is really it's about efficiency and cooling performance. If you've got a good cooling solution, especially for games.
Yeah, like an AIO, all-in-one cooler on the CPU, like the temperature of your case isn't really going to affect the temperature of the CPU all that much.
Yeah,
Not as much as if you're using an air cooler.
For sure, but even with a good quality air cooler, because games don't actually have high CPU loads, right? They're usually between about 40 to about 60%.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can peg a little bit more if they're lightly threaded, but for most intents and purposes, you're generally going to have a much lower CPU temperature. Now, wouldn't it make more sense to be able to actually have your graphics card influence your fans?
Right.
And that's what you can actually do.
Especially if you're using a graphics card like one of these, it's the the air that they're bringing in to cool themselves is coming in from the front of the system. Right?
You got it. So in this situation, take for instance, we could put our dual graphics card in, and we could have our chassis fans respond to the graphics card. So instead of responding to the CPU, it responds to this source. Right. So those intake fans provide more direct airflow because, you know, depending on your GPU, it could be at 65, 70, maybe 75 degrees, right? So this helps to provide a more dynamic and responsive air cooling configuration. And you can actually map it to different sources too. You could map it to, let's say, the VRM, or you could map it to the motherboard temperature. But all the way around, when you combine all these things in terms of the fan controls, you can really see that the depth of what, quote unquote, our more entry-level X370 board offers is unquestionably really impressive.
Right. So that's, I mean, that's a lot of data about the X370 Pro, and a lot of those features are moving over to the higher end boards. So that's why we did this one first, to kind of go over the basics of what's different on X370 and what's new. But why don't we talk about the ROG board? Let's get to the exciting board.
Yeah. So let's go ahead.
I mean, they're both exciting, but we get to the more gaming centric, the more enthusiast centric board. Yeah.
So this is a very, very special board. You know, like I noted a little bit earlier, I've been now with the company for almost 9 years. Right. ROG is now in its 11th year. So it is really this, it is the stalwart and it is the industry leader when it comes to the de facto gaming brand, right? It has started from originally one motherboard, and actually a very special motherboard because it was a crosshair motherboard.
So the very first ROG motherboard that we made was an AMD board.
That's correct.
And it was a crosshair, so the crosshair one.
So it's really kind of a personal story in this deep relationship that ASUS and ROG have together at really setting not only the quote-unquote real first gaming motherboard in the industry, but then also it being an AMD-based motherboard, right? And then we look from year to year, right? The crosshair has had an outstanding lineage in terms of how it's been recognized in the industry in terms of setting new design trends, new features and functions, right? And it has been really copied, but never really duplicated in terms of this, regardless of kind of what some other companies have come out and said that, you know, whether they're the first AMD gaming boards or whatnot, we can really know that the history has been proved upon with the Crosshair series.
Yeah, Jeff, and if you pay attention to our social channels, we'll do Throwback Thursdays on our Instagram, and we usually find pictures of those old boards, and they look pretty cool. You know, it's interesting to see how much they've changed.
They've evolved, but even when you go back to those boards, you will see that there was focuses like specialized audio designs, overclocking functionality, even aesthetic design focus at that era where the boards were definitely not aesthetically designed.
They weren't as pretty, but when they started with the ROG, they tried to make them look...
Exactly, the aesthetics started to become a focus. Now, if we flash forward beyond the original board and we just look at the last generation, that Crosshair board was very special. It helped us set the highest overclock that had ever been reached, 8.7 gigahertz. On an AMD FX series CPU, and then held 9 #1 overclocking positions. It's unquestionably just a monster board. So then when we had to design the Crosshair 6, we were like,
we had some big shoes to fill.
Some big shoes to fill, and what we were going to do to really be able to maintain the benchmark and the legacy. So this is what we feel of continuing the tradition of really a super impressive board from every level. You know, audio, networking, overclocking, aesthetics. So
so let's look at the aesthetics. I think we got a picture of it up here. We can give you guys a close look at it. And so it's still got that monochrome feel. It's all just like kind of different shades of gray.
Yeah, so this is really our latest design trend. So I kind of call it this kind of a passive aggressive look to it, right? But it's just got a really beautiful kind of clean design aesthetic to it where you've got black, silver, you know, and that shades of kind of gray. And once again, it's about making sure that this board never competes with what your color choice is, right? It doesn't matter what you want to do. You could do red, blue, black, orange, purple, green, and it's going to fit with this board perfectly.
Yes, if you want to use blue fans, blue case, blue RAM,
and
blue cable, PSU cables, you can do it.
Exactly. It's just going to be an automatically complementary contrast. And then, of course, when you pair it up with something like this Strix Series graphics card, you can see that the color symmetry is fantastic.
Yeah, it's got a very, very close design language, and they look really good together.
Exactly. And then, of course, when we talk about just like the Prime, this board does feature lighting, but it takes it to the next level. So we've got 2 zones of lighting, one here in the shroud, and then another here in the PCH. Now, just like in the Prime, though, we make sure that the LED zones do feature some form of diffusion. We don't want this the lighting kind of abruptly just kind of scream at you, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to zoom in here on the Crosshair 6 logo. And you can see how it's diffused. It's a very soft light. It's not shining out at you, you know, like
Exactly, exactly. And the same thing, even here, we actually develop a special extrusion process for the actual metal heatsink assembly that we have here to be able to create that diffusion. So I think it looks really great. And like the Prime, we step up from not just one RGB header, but we actually have 2 RGB headers.
Right.
And that's really great because it gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of that when you want to run maybe dual cable setups, maybe one for an LED strip or another for another LED strip or for a chassis with LED lighting, you can do all that.
And the placement is cool too. There's one, I'm just showing them on the picture, there's one on the bottom here and then one on the top. So that'll help you run those LED strips around your case. Right?
Exactly, exactly.
And having the 2 different channels, you can even have those do 2 different things.
Yep.
Or you can have them do the same exact thing.
Exactly, and that's all available within our software. So, you know, I think here we can actually give you guys a little bit of a shot of a system so you can give you some context of what a crosshair system looks like when we incorporate some RGB lighting. So this is a pretty cool build that we actually finished up here. We called it, quote unquote, the Crimson build because I wanted to be able to kind of take that red color scheme that ROG has been known for.
Yeah, and this is with the Crosshair 6, obviously.
As well as AMD, and you can see here we've got a nice combination of kind of different components and some synchronization options here. And so you're going to see right here it's in the classic kind of red and black configuration, but now we're shifting over into the kind of the whole RGB mode.
RGB party mode. So this is, I mean, this might be a little obnoxious to have this going in your system at all times, but this is just an example of what you could do with all the different LED.
Exactly. It's really up to you to be able to define the look and feel you want. And actually, for those of you out there that are even looking for some practical usability, we do have options in our software that allow you to do things like temperature monitoring.
Right.
So you can actually have the software actually show you different lighting values for when the system actually reaches different temperature zones. So that, I think, covers a lot of kind of the aesthetic focus, and I think overall you guys hopefully really love this. And one last point that I do want to touch on, though, that is a little bit separate is actually the 3D printing initiative that I also think ties into the aesthetics.
Right, yeah.
So a unique thing is that it's not directly on this board, but what ASUS has gone ahead and done is we've actually designed a huge amount of 3D printing accessories.
Right, that people can download.
Correct.
It's like a CAD file.
Yep.
And then you can, if you have a 3D printer, you can 3D print it yourself.
Or you can go through a 3D printing hub service, so you send them the file and have it printed out. But you've got tons of different options. So, you know, I think if you...
Right, so, but first let's show like some of the, like the mounting points on here. So like, there's basically, they're basically 3D printed components that have custom, that will fit onto custom mounting points on here. So
correct.
Why don't we check out this video that kind of goes over some of the accessories that that people can print out themselves and add onto their system.
Yeah, and so this gives you a high level of customization. So you can see you've got everything from, you know, special cable covers. You actually have nameplates that you can do. You have actually M.2 fan holders.
And actually what they're showing here is the nameplate. The nameplate's customizable, so you can have it. You can name your system and put it on there, or you can put it your name, whatever. And you can see how they go onto those little. In this case, they're going onto the M.2. So they just kind of bolt on.
Yeah, so it's a really easy process, and those screws actually come included inside the box. And you can see here for actually one of the covers that actually goes over the 24-pin area interface, it actually uses the same mounting points that you would traditionally mount for the motherboard.
Right.
But all the way around, I think it's a really cool initiative. And so as 3D printing continues to evolve, become more cost accessible, it's just another way that you can define the look and feel for your system. And keep in mind that while everything that we're showing you here is, of course, in this kind of black aesthetic, you're really only limited to the color filament that you want to use. So it could be, you know, it could be red, it could be white, it could be gray, it could be whatever color you want. So you could create some really interesting contrast options.
Definitely.
So moving from the aesthetic focus, you know, we talked about, of course, the VRM and kind of overclocking on the Prime series.
Yeah.
But on the ROG series, it goes to that next level.
Right.
So, you know, without getting into too much technical minutia, you know, you've got some serious upgrades here. One, you've got a much beefier heatsink that has an integrated sintered heat pipe. So that helps to give you much, much better cooling performance. But also actually even the VRM components, here we step up to a higher power phase delivery. You've got fully molded microalloy inductors, which are awesome. You've got higher performing capacitors, and you have something called power stages instead of traditional MOSFETs and drivers.
Okay.
These are really beefy, and what this really just means...
what does that mean for the layman? Like, what does that mean?
These parts, they're just rated for a much higher threshold. And so essentially when you put them under load, they operate more efficiently and essentially more reliably. So if you're really hammering the system, the overall VRM is going to run cooler and more reliably. So if you're really looking to push your system and keep it under a heavy sustained load, you're going to have a potential improved experience here. There's also going to be that for those die-hard tweaking tuning enthusiasts, there's more options that we enable within the UEFI environment to be able to kind of get into the nitty and gritty. So say for instance on the Prime board, we only have one DOCP profile option, but on ROG boards, we actually have 5 profiling options. And that's because we've custom tuned them to different memory options that are out there. So there's like Samsung ICs, there's different memory ICs for different memory chips, and some favor different options. But this is one of the things that you get when you buy into ROG. You're not just getting this board, but you're getting our ROG R&D team, right? We're literally talking about sometimes thousands of man hours distilled into these new functions and features that we build in to make quick profiling really advantageous and smooth out your overclocking experience.
Just to make it easier for guys who guys like me who don't want to individually set everything.
You just want to click a button.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's like, hey, I want more performance. Let me flip the switch and turn it on, right?
Yeah, and you still get all that great auto tuning technology that we talked about. Because in the past, for you that have bought an AMD ROG motherboard, you never had the auto tuning technology. So this is the first ROG series motherboard that now features our full, rich auto tuning technology. So you can have it both ways: manual overclocking or automated overclocking. So let's go now into the I/O spec.
Yeah, let's talk about the rear I/O real quick, and then we talk about the rest of the board, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure.
So this one, I think we mentioned before, it's got a ton of USB ports, and I think if I can just bring up a shot here of the rear I/O.
So here, from the top, just a quick recount on what we see here on the I/O. At the top, you've got the clear CMOS button. It's a traditional requirement for any enthusiast board. And then you've got the USB BIOS flashback button. This is really awesome because no CPU, no memory, no graphics card. Just connect the power supply and you can update the BIOS or the UEFI. So that's really nice that you can just start off your build with the best UEFI. And also for this generation, which I know you thought was pretty awesome, you actually have it built even into the UEFI that you can just go to our easy update option, connect the Ethernet port. You don't even have to go to the second system.
So before you even install Windows, you can be in the UEFI, and you can be updating the BIOS from there.
And that's both on the Prime and the Crosshair. Now, moving to the core I/O spec, like you said, this is a monster here. So we've got 4 USB 3 ports. We think we got 4 USB 2 ports, 4 more USB 3 ports, and then we've got USB 3.1, both Type C and Type A.
Yeah, so for those of you counting, that's 14 USB ports on the back of this.
Correct.
I think any of you, if you're the type of person who always has to use a USB hub, this would be the board for you. You'll be all right.
And keep in mind that we haven't gotten to the internal USB, right? So you've even got more. You've got then the Intel Gigabit Ethernet, just like we had on the Prime. This one still also features the LAN guard design, but it also features an even more advanced version of our packet priority software. So this is the game first packet priority software. So one of the really cool things there, it actually automatically detects games. So the moment, if I was to jump in like Battlefield 1, or if I was to jump in Evolve, or The Witcher 3, or whatever it might be, it automatically sets my game to be prioritized, and anything else that I have running, whether it's like a Spotify desktop or Chrome or whatever it might be, gets set to a lower priority so that I get a smoother experience. Now from there, then at the bottom, of course, we have our multi-channel line level audio output. We have gold plating on the jacks that helps to reduce oxidation. We've got the optical out, but then we move into the audio section. So before we jump into the audio, though, we can just quickly recap for those that are wondering about the internal headers. Front USB 3.1, just like the Prime, 8 SATA 6G ports, M.2 in a more optimal position as well for better thermal performance. It's isolated from hot zones. You got 2 PCIe slots. These, just like our Prime board, also feature the safe slot design integration. So these are using injection molding with actually metal framing, so this improves what's called torsion resistance.
Right, so if you're using a big, heavy graphics card like this RX 480 here, then it's gonna hold it straighter and have a better connection.
Or in reality, because of course, our previous ones, it wasn't like people were running into the slots where they were breaking or anything, but if you were taking your system to a LAN or transporting it, and you want to keep it in there, this helps to essentially make sure that you get a more secure and reliable long-term connection, and there's not going to be any issues there. And then of course, you got your traditional PCIe by 1 connections, and then a front USB 3.0 at the bottom. Now, with that, let's move back over into the audio, where I think there's some really exciting stuff here. So we talked about on the Prime, we've got that Realtek 1220, right?
Yes.
Well, we've got the same Realtek 1220 here, but a special version of it.
Right. So what does that mean?
So we actually co-worked with Realtek to essentially bin a version of this chip.
Okay.
So it's a sorted, higher performing version. So all the key metrics such as signal noise ratio, THD, all the operating specifications for this chip are higher than they are on any other.
So they need to pass a certain test before they get put onto the ROG board.
Correct, and that's why we classify the audio design as Supreme Effects Audio, because it had to meet a higher requirement.
Right.
So it has that special binning, which would mean it already gets better performance across the board. You still have the line level out and line level input improvements. You have a high-grade operational amplifier for both the headphone and the output, just like on the other board. The automatic sensor detection, the audio-grade capacitors. This one, though, also features where the Prime doesn't, is a depup filter. So the depup filter is nice.
Like if you left your system, or you left your speakers on overnight, you turn your system on the next day, sometimes you can get a pop with other systems. But with this, that wouldn't happen.
Exactly. We help to minimize or reduce it, or in some situations entirely eliminate it. Now, what probably makes it the most special is there's a special jitter clock and an ESS Sabre DAC. So this is a very high audio DAC chip that you would find in normally outboard DAC type solutions.
Right.
Sabre is really kind of the reference class in there. So this really helps to provide improved tonality and a richness and warmth, so that regardless of we're talking about games, games are going to get better accuracy, better positioning, just better audio experience. But especially if you like to watch, movies, you watch videos, you listen to music, a really great audio experience with this ESS Sabre DAC that's built on board. Awesome. And rounding that out is going to be a really great audio experience. So it's not just the hardware, but the software. We redesigned what we call our Sonic Studio Audio Suite, and then we also have Sonic Radar. So the cool things that we have in terms of the Sonic Studio.
I think it's the wrong photo, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. That's actually our UEFI interface. With the Sonic Studio, the cool thing that you're going to have there is the ability to actually assign our presets to specific outputs.
Okay.
So the main benefit there is that in the past, if we set like a specialized preset, whether you made your own EQ or you used one of our presets, it was applied unilaterally to everything. Right. So kind of some people found that frustrating because they would have to go back and toggle something off and on.
But basically what that means is like, so if you're listening to music, you have one preset. If you're playing a game, you have a different one, and so on. Movies
and you can assign it to a specific application.
Right.
And then for the Sonic Radar interface, we entirely overhauled it and redid it so that now it actually has much better, I'd say, a visual presentation that's clearer to understand.
Right.
So we actually used I'd say a trailing effect to what actually is shown up on the screen. Before, kind of everything would show up in one immediate value, but now it actually tiers it out and it will fade in and out. So it only show you essentially where you want to focus in at, and you can also have it dialed into specific frequencies. Okay. So regardless of the game, if you want to have certain frequencies be picked up, you can do that. So some pretty cool stuff there.
Awesome. So there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about on this board, and one of them, actually two more. So let's get into the first one. It's water cooling. Yeah. So I know this has it's the ROG board, so it works well with custom water cooling loops.
You know it.
Yeah. Why don't you tell everybody out there how it does that?
So of course we've got all the traditional fan functionality that we already talked about, right? So you've got 3-pin and 4-pin header support, automatic fan calibration, the fan ramping, you've got the PWM splitting support, you've got dedicated all-in-one, you've got dedicated pump headers, right? But then you have this really cool dedicated water cooling zone. Right.
So see if I can get a close-up of that for the audience here.
Water cooling zone works in two ways. Here we can see we've got a water flow monitor. So this is what you traditionally talk about when you talk about a water flow monitor. So now you actually connect this directly to that water flow monitoring so that you can monitor that process.
So this piece here, it's just a visual cue.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's like, I know it's flowing, but you don't know exactly how much.
Exactly. Right? So now you can actually monitor that information.
Just with the header on the motherboard. It'll give you flow readings.
Exactly, gives you flow readings. The other advantage is going to be temperature inlet and temperature outlet monitoring. So this is really what I'd say is a combination assistive reading to the core information that you have in terms of your temperature readings. So this helps you to actually know that your loop is working optimally. You essentially know what the temperature is at the starting point and at the end point, and if something's off, right? You can immediately see this.
So you can monitor that, and if it changes, you know there might be a leak or something's not working as efficiently as it should.
Exactly. So this is really, once again, about ROG being at the forefront of really innovating and putting features and functions that are really designed first and foremost for enthusiasts. We really try to think at the forefront of being able to put things that are not superfluous, right? Now, of course, is every user going to use that? No. But that's the reason why it's not on something like the Prime, right? It's on a board where we find that there's going to be a higher probability of people that want this type of functionality.
Yeah, if you're going to be building a custom all-out water cooling loop, you're going to be getting the Crosshair 6.
Exactly, exactly. So a really unique feature, and the first time it's ever been offered on an AMD series motherboard. So when you tie that in together with the rest of the fan control, fan implementations, right, for Fan Expert 4, including that temperature input mapping that we talked about on the Prime, it's just going to be an outstanding water cooling and fan control experience in general.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So continuing on with like the custom cooling, let's talk about the what kind of CPU coolers you can mount on here. So this one is a little special. The AM4 is a new mount.
Correct.
Right? But this one, well, basically what makes the mount special on this one?
So we actually did this in previous ROG motherboards, and we reintroduced it. So AMD for the high-end like X series, so 1700X, and then also for the 1800X, don't actually ship with coolers. But if you've made the investment in a previous high-end type of cooling solution, it's actually, I think, in the very beginning.
At the very beginning? I just want to show like there's a diagram that shows kind of the dual mounting.
Yeah, so the actual socket interface actually supports both AM3 and AM4 mounting points.
Okay.
And so the key benefit that you're going to have there is that if you've already made an investment essentially in one of those high-end cooling configurations, you don't have to worry about getting a bracket or anything along those lines.
Right.
Because maybe they're not going to produce a bracket, maybe you don't want to wait to get the bracket or whatever it might be, you're going to essentially already have that available to you. So it's a really nice option. That is a differentiating point also on the Prime, where with the Prime you would need to leverage essentially
Sorry guys, I
bracket.
couldn't get a photo of it, but yeah, basically it'll take the brand new AM4 socket coolers and the AM3. So if you got like an older cooler that's still working well, but you want to upgrade, you can still use it on this.
Exactly. So it's a really kind of a best of both worlds solution, and for anybody that's already made that pre-existing investment in their cooling solution, it allows you to probably best realize an easy way to transition into it. And the good thing about it is that because of the efficiency that you have with the Ryzen series of CPUs, pretty much all the cooling solutions that exist on the market are going to be very effective at being able to offer a great overclocking experience here.
Right.
You don't need to necessarily worry like, oh, I've got to go get a monster cooling solution just to be able to handle this. You know, I can tell you already, I was comfortably able to take something like a, we had a Thermaltake Ring 240 closed loop water cooling solution. I was able to hit 4 gigahertz with that, but also with a tower heatsink.
And that was on the Prime board too.
Yeah, that was actually on the Prime board, exactly. So, you know, you don't have to go crazy, and there's also going to be some cooling solutions that are going to be available directly boxed from AMD that still offer a solid cooling experience. So whatever you're going to be throwing on the board, you can get a solid, reliable OC experience.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think we pretty much covered everything. There's a couple more things that we wanted to talk about. Was the we got about 10 minutes left in the stream.
So yeah, we've got
to actually, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a couple of always cool little extras that are in it. Sometimes people don't always realize. So there's subtle things. So a lot of these ones might be the software package that comes included with the board. So with ROG board, you're going to get ROG RAM disk and RAM cache. So these are, even if you bought these separately through like third-party software, it's actually fairly expensive. With RAM disk, you can actually create your own storage disk that will stay and be maintained even through reboots and through shutdowns. So you could run something like directly your web browser. You can have our RAM cache software, which actually allows you to essentially take a cache and associate it with your local volume. So your storage volume, even SSDs, and be able to minimize actually some of the write cycles and reading cycles that get applied to that and improve performance.
Right. So you can improve the performance of like a 2.5 inch, like SATA SSD, something like that.
Even actually a traditional SSD, you can actually get improved performance, and it can actually stabilize read and write copying performance in certain high copy scenarios. So that's pretty cool. You also have a full 1-year licensed version of Kaspersky antivirus. So some users, they forget about AV, but especially when you talk about, the files that you're downloading, the emails that you're opening, the game servers that you're connecting to in different parts of the world, downloading patches and software and all kinds of stuff. It's nice to know that you've got a very high quality AV solution. You don't need to pay for it. It's there, it runs lean, so and you're good to go, right? So that's a really nice fun to add. And then for both boards, we've got Q-Design. Q-Design is something ASUS has had for years, but it helps to provide a better experience. We've got things like open latched single-sided DIMM. This makes it super easy. When you're installing DIMMs, you don't have to worry about clicking 2 sides. Or if I've got a graphics card installed, I don't got to unlatch this bottom one here. I can just open up one and then pull out the DIMM. We've got wide interfaces right here for the actual latches for the PCIe slots. We've got our quick connector that comes in for the front LEDs. Nobody likes to run little connector for your power leads.
For the power LEDs and all that.
You've got QLED, which is a diagnostic LED system for your CPU, your DRAM, your boot device, and your graphics card. This board has a debug LED, but sometimes people find it hard to know. It's like I get a 71 or 55.
You got to look it up.
Exactly.
But that has actual LEDs that's like memory okay and all that.
Exactly. And so that just makes it a little bit clearer, to immediately know, hey, is that causing me, an issue with that? So there's a lot of subtle things. We've got, power and reset buttons. The ROG board even has some crazier stuff, like it's got special retry buttons and safe mode buttons from kind of intermediate overclocking steps if you want to try to start certain things.
So that's easy. I mean, like for the enthusiast overclockers who, they don't have to always wait for it to come up, for the screen to come up, right? They can do. They have all the controls here right on the board.
Right. Or also if you're doing like your initial setup testing, one of the advantages of that safe mode button is that if you click the CMOS button, it clears every single setting. Okay. Safe mode just resets frequency parameters, right? But you don't lose like my fan settings, my boot orders, and all those other kind of things. So a lot of really cool stuff that's baked in there.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, so what's the what's the availability on these?
Availability is like these CPUs. It's right now. So these boards and these CPUs have been on pre-order since the 22nd.
Right. So we announced some a week ago.
Yeah, and they have been very successful. So if you guys have been checking out, different spots in terms of picking it up, they might have already potentially sold out, but you're going to continue to see a lot of availability over the coming weeks, not only on the CPU side, but on the motherboard side. Right. And there are two boards that we didn't talk about that do also help to fill out our launch portfolio. So we do have a B350 Plus, which is a great option. Yeah,
let me see if I can bring up an image of that real quick, just so people can get a look at that.
And so this is still a really cool, unique looking board. It's got a red and black kind of aesthetic to it. It's got an improved audio design.
And this is the B350 chipset,
exactly,
right?
B350. Okay. So you actually still have overclocking support actually on this chipset as well. It's a little bit more pared down in terms of a lot of the higher end features, but still a solid entry offering that's still got a cool design aesthetic. And it's even got lighting on here.
Yeah, it's even got the ROG, or the RGB LED header.
Exactly.
And it does have some...
Just not integrated RGB lighting, but you do have lighting zones.
Some red lighting on the...
Exactly. So it's still cool, kind of classic setup. And then we've got the B350 Micro ATX. So for you guys that are looking to build a Ryzen Micro ATX box...
That's this one here, right?
Exactly, you've got that. And if you guys check out actually this site that we're on, edgeup.asus.com, we've actually got a full kind of guide that walks you through the 4 different motherboards that we offer, insights into the boards, their features and functions, so that you can help to find the right choice. And definitely over the coming weeks and months, you'll see more content there on more boards.
Yeah, doing more testing,
overclocking insights, a lot of different things. So it'll really help you to kind of find out all the information to find out how you can best get a great experience from ASUS and the corresponding ecosystem. Because while we touch on X270, we've got RX series graphics cards, we've got FreeSync monitors, we've got peripherals that all kind of tie together to give you a great experience. If you want to build something on Ryzen, we're going to get you covered.
Definitely. Well, I think that's a good place to end. I think we got a couple more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and check and see if we got any comments. Sorry, I wasn't looking that attentively earlier. We didn't really get to many of them. So let's see if we can find any of them. But actually, it looks like Gary from ASUS has been answering some questions. So I want to give a shout out to Gary. Thanks for answering some questions for us.
Fantastic.
But this is just on.
And like always too, as Greg takes a look through there too, you guys can always, reach out to us on our social media channels, whether it's going to be Twitter or Facebook or any one of our platforms. We definitely try to be engaged and be able to provide you guys insights so that if you're looking to be able to better understand the features and functionalities, we try to be able to make sure that we're accessible for you. And we also are very active in quite a number of different communities and different forum groups to be able to provide insights into what we're doing, new UEFI releases that provide performance enhancements. And I can definitely tell you, our R&D team right now is working around the clock to be able to enable a great, stable, and reliable overclocking experience for the latest generation of Ryzen series CPUs. So a lot of good updates are going to be coming out over time.
I'm actually enjoying reading these comments. There's a lot of people who have been just kind of asking questions. Other people have been answering them. A lot of back and forth going on. One person asked if we're going to talk about the less expensive like B350, and we did, so that's good.
Yeah, and like I said, definitely you get all the key breakdowns there if you check out that EdgeUp article by our EdgeUp team. Some good insights in there. But that board does feature, like I said, an isolated audio design. It's got our land guard design. It's still got a quality UEFI. Good, easy options there in terms of enabling quick and easy functions for fan control functionality. So it makes a good baseline board. I would definitely say I wouldn't exclude it. If you're looking for a more budget, lower budget price point for an AMD Ryzen enabled system, it's a good offering. But I think that the Prime is still though my go-to board for that entry point.
Definitely. So we got one question here from Eddie Evans. He says, are you sure you can update the BIOS without a CPU installed?
Yes, correct. So that is actually a key function of the USB BIOS flashback technology. There's a built-in special chip that allows us to do this. Right. So that is the reason why we can do it without the CPU. So yes, 100% no CPU, no memory, no graphics card. The only thing that you have to have is just the power supply connected. And then the actual button on the back will flash. Yeah. So once the flashing stops, that's when you know that the actual UEFI update process is complete.
Oh, and then one person, he actually mentioned he actually works for ASUS. So shout out to Ian for pointing this out. One thing we forgot to mention on the back of this is there is another M.2 slot, but it's not for storage. It's for adding an E-key Wi-Fi module. So on the back, it doesn't come with it, but if you wanted to add internal Wi-Fi to your ROG board, you can add it with a little M.2 E-key.
Yeah, so that is essentially, if we take a look here at the side profile, you guys are not going to be able to see it, but you'll see that there's an open cavity within this actual shroud interface. And so this is what's being referred to is that there's an actual interface connection there that would allow for this. Now, ideally, it would require a special housing module. So it might be one of these accessories that if we get a lot of feedback from you guys out there in the community, if it's something you're interested in, we can definitely discuss with our product management team about seeing if this accessory could come to the market so that if you want native integrated Wi-Fi for the motherboard, that's a really nice option. But of course, for a lot of you guys out there, if you want integrated high performance, if you want 811 AC Wi-Fi, we've got wireless PCIe add-in cards as well as USB adapters to cover you.
Right. So there's one more question that we'll answer, and that's from Facebook. It's from Calvin McDowell. He says, "Where is the motherboard temperature taken?" So, where do you know where on this motherboard it has the temperature sensor?
So yeah, in most situations, the actual motherboard temperature is actually read directly from the Super I/O controller chip. So the Super I/O controller chip is going to be down in this section over here, generally around where the PCH is.
Just right underneath the PCH.
Yeah, okay. So that's usually where you're going to pull it. But there is also other temperature sensors. So some users are very specific about where they want to read temperatures. So there's actually an OPT temperature sensor. So this is an optional temp sensor. So you can use what's called a thermosistor, and you could plug that in there, and you could put that on any location where you want to be able to have a specific readout for that temperature. But I would say that for this board, especially for an ROG motherboard, you really don't need to be conscious of this temperature. You're never going to need to worry about it, even in an extreme scenario. We generally do qualification for temperature of these boards, I think in excess of an internal 50C in a special high humidity chamber as well. So very, very tough. You don't really need to worry about it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it from us. It's 5 o'clock, so I think we're going to wrap it up. And I want to thank all of you guys for watching, and thanks JJ for coming out and being the expert in all this. I think I learned a lot, and I hope you guys at home did too. I also want to thank Newegg for letting us come down and shoot in their studio here. And if you want to watch at 5:30, we're actually going to be doing another stream, AMD. It's going to be an AMD build. So if you're interested in that, we'll be tweeting that out where you can find that link to watch that. So that's at 5:30 p.m.
Yeah, we might even be doing some Ryzen overclocking. So I would definitely recommend that, and check it out, guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time.